Tonight, in partnership with Aerosmith Press and the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, it is our great privilege to make space for this memorial, mourning the loss and speaking truth to the legacy of writer Victoria Amelina. Before we begin, I'd like to orient you to your surroundings. First of all, you may notice there are a lot of people here, so thank you so much. If you are seated, you will have found a book on your chair called Nothing Bad Has Ever Happened, a bouquet for Victoria Amelina. This book is presented to you without charge. You may take it home and we hope you will share it with others. It has been published by Aerosmith Press for this event specifically and to share beyond it. If you're standing, we do have copies at the desk over there, so make sure that as long as we have them, you go home with one tonight. I'd also like to share that today marks the end point of a 6-week fundraising collaboration between the Booksmith and Helping Ukrainian Books and Booksellers, an organization founded in Boston by people in this very audience. Hub works to put relief funds directly into the hands of libraries and book professionals in Ukraine who have been impacted by the devastations of war. As of this week, our Hub fundraiser has raised over $14.6 thousand from almost 4,500 donors. We do invite you to join them if you haven't already. You may ask to make a donation at any register today in any amount. Any donation is deeply appreciated by the Booksmith, by Hub, and by the people who receive these funds. Before I pass the podium to our readers, I would like to speak to why we are here in this spot. Brookline Booksmith strives to be a place of community, an avenue of communion, to shine a light on free speech, smothered voices, love and ideas, and the magnificence of gathering. We wish to be a home for literature and all the good it can do. Sometimes I believe, and to our joy, we succeed in that mission. Victoria Amelina once lived in Brookline, and perhaps in another world, we could have received an email from her, or her American publisher, or her friends. Would you like to host this author for a reading? But we won't. That letter will not be written. We will never be able to say yes. So what do we do when we are too late, when violence is insistent on destroying good things? We return to our purpose. Where we can't protect life, we may have a chance to confirm and uphold legacy. A legacy of literature, of strength, of unwillingness to yield to despair. A legacy of seeing culture and creation as sacred and continuing to protect and create because that is what we people are for. Because many people here grieve, but to grieve is not the same as to give up. I see your refusal to give up, and so we make space. I and everyone at Brookline Booksmith are grateful that we have been invited into this moment. I offer thanks to Aerosmith Press, to the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, to Helping Ukrainian Books and Booksellers for sharing their missions with us, for bringing us together today. I offer welcome to Victoria's community for the many reasons that you are here. I hope that this reading brings comfort to your grief and strength to your resolve. Thank you for coming, and now Victoria in her own words.
Because that was basically my kind of last question for this block. To try and think about why a novel such as this one you felt was necessary, why you felt that you needed to write it, and the response. Maybe you could also comment on the response in Ukraine and elsewhere that you received to the novel.
So there are several reasons again. So one is, of course, because I wanted to finally cover the entire set of Lviv stories. I wanted all the people who are kind of invisible in Lviv to be in the picture. I wanted the Jews and the Poles kind of present there, and this is why there is this apartment of lamb and no lamb, because this is exactly about the fact that these people are not in Lviv anymore, and we only have their empty apartments. And secondly, of course, it's because I wanted to talk about responsibility and the need for everyone, not just for those people who come from patriotic families who preserved traditions and preserved language, but the need for all Ukrainians to try and look for their family history, to maybe notice that their grandmothers and grandfathers spoke maybe Ukrainian, and then somehow their parents switched to Russian. So why did it happen? What's your response It's not that you have to switch to Ukrainian, but at least you have to think what happened, why your grandmother spoke Ukrainian, and then your parents, for some reason, already speak Russian. What violence led to such a, I don't know, forgetfulness, right? Why have your family forgotten at least one of the languages, right? So I think people just have to think about it, and I wanted this novel to speak also to people who maybe rarely read fiction in Ukrainian, but rather read in Russian, but still I wanted to write about them and to talk to them. And I have a right to do that because I myself come from Russian-speaking family, and my first language was Russian, actually. So I made my choice, but again, it's up to the people, but still, it's worth thinking about, right? And the other thing is that with Russian aggression, of course, we have a lot of refugees, or as we call them, IDPs, internally displaced persons. So I just saw a lot of it. I have many close friends and relatives actually, who had to flee and they lost their houses, their home. I also, as a writer, I traveled a lot across the front line. And the thing is that most of the people, I think, who fled to the occupied territory, they didn't move too far away. Many of them just live in the nearby small towns.
The government controls.
Yeah, so if you come to, for instance, city of Kramatorsk, you meet a lot of people from Donetsk. So actually, and those people come to the literary events because when you have no home and you have war in your home, you suddenly feel the need to talk about important things, to listen to literature or something. So a lot of them come, and of course, all of this made me think about what home is. And this made me realize as well what a tragedy it was for those who had to leave Lviv forever during the 1944 and 45. So this also made me think about Stanislav Lem, who never came back. Yeah. And I don't know what he would think about this book, in fact, I don't know. But I would like him to come back. It's never happened, but at least in book.
Thank you, Alex. Can you hear me? Is this on? No. Okay. Yeah, great. My name is Oskar Melnichuk. It's my good fortune to thank the extraordinary efforts of all who work at the Booksmith. The folks I've worked with, Lisa Gozashti, Alex Schaffner, and Pierce Alquist, have reminded me that every single employee at the Booksmith has collaborated in the fundraising effort in support of Ukrainian books and booksellers. To date, the Booksmith, as Alex reported, has raised nearly $15,000. So one more hand of applause for all of the employees of the Booksmith. I also need to thank my team at Arrowsmith, in particular Ezra Fox, for so graciously and ably rising to the task at the last moment of adding this tribute book to Victoria to our fall list and to producing such a handsome volume. And if you've not gotten a copy, there are copies available at the door. My thanks to all of Victoria's friends here and around the world who contributed to it and who are watching tonight. Friends in Spain, Ireland, Colombia, Canada, Ukraine. I was saying to my wife, the writer Alex Johnson, last night, how much I was looking forward to this evening's gathering, because it is, for me, a privilege to be among you, all of you, our readers, our contributors, the writers who are in the book but can't be here tonight, but also all of you in the audience, our honored guests, because by your presence, by choosing to honor someone who gave her young life in the cause of justice, you show the world that her quest was not idle. By your presence here tonight, you show that you've not succumbed to the temptations of a facile cynicism, and that you believe the struggle for justice is meaningful for its own sake. Perhaps even that the quest for it is what gives meaning to a life. I did not know Victoria very well or very long, but somehow with Victoria that didn't matter. In August 2022, I co-taught an online course in creative writing for Ukrainian students as part of the University of Iowa's International Writing Program, whose director, Christopher Merrill, is here with us tonight. My co-teacher was the young Ukrainian novelist I met while she was living with her husband, who is also here with us tonight, Alex Amelin, while she was living in Brookline. And this was her favorite bookstore. Victoria Amelina was a gentle, soft-spoken, inward-looking person. Our first conversation was about her recent trip to Tibet. She asked about local places to meditate. I told her about the Insight Meditation Center on Broadway in Cambridge. Victoria was traveling in Egypt with her son when the war began. After leaving him with her mother in Krakow, she hastened back to her native city of Lviv in western Ukraine. It wasn't long before she set aside the novel she was working on in favor of a new writing project, documenting the work of women documenting war crimes. She was in the middle of it when she agreed to co-teach with me. That our Zoom classes were taking place during a full-scale war became especially evident whenever an air raid siren sounded from one of the students' computers or Victoria's. Though we strongly encouraged it, I don't recall anyone ever heeding the siren and leaving a session. The text we gave our students was Ursula Le Guin's haunting parable, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Omelas is a utopia, a city in which everyone is always happy. Life consists of endless festivals and street fairs. Such joys aren't entirely free, however. The good life comes at a cost. A child of indeterminate sex is kept locked away, naked, in a basement. And every citizen of Omelas, on reaching a certain age, is brought down to look at it, and if they choose, abuse it. Initially, the sight shocks the young people. It offends them. But, their elders explain, it's the necessary price for the happiness of the many. And over time, the logic of the good of the many at the expense of the few overcomes their horror. Most accept the situation. A few, however, find themselves unwilling to be complicitous. They leave paradise for the unknown. Our students responded intensely to this story. To them, that child in the basement was none other than Ukraine. They were the lambs Europe and the so-called free world were willing to sacrifice in order to maintain their relative stability and prosperity. However, the students weren't themselves ready to accept the parable's binaries. Either you stay and ignore the child's suffering, or you walk away. Why, they asked, didn't people rebel and free the child? Who knew if the threatened consequences would come to pass? Victoria was one of those who chose to stay in Omelas without accepting the terms. She would do all she could to liberate that child by making sure the world could not ignore what was being done to it. In late June, she accompanied several writers from Colombia on a fact-finding mission to Kramatorsk near the front lines, which she'd visited so often. She was enjoying dinner with her new friends at a restaurant popular with local journalists when the missile hit. Everyone ducked under the table except Victoria. She'd been struck in the back of the neck by shrapnel. A dozen people were killed instantly in that strike, which a Russian general described the next day as exemplary. Victoria, however, was still breathing. She was transported to a hospital in the city of Dnipro. There, a team of surgeons did all they could to try to save her. She stayed alive long enough for her family and friends to gather around her, but on July 1st, that big heart of hers stopped beating. After the first death, there is no other, wrote Dylan Thomas in one of the most celebrated poems to come out of World War II. Victoria has completed her worldly task, leaving us the legacy of her example, of grace under pressure, as Hemingway defined courage, and the abiding importance of her mission. Victoria died so that Ukrainian democracy and the singular culture which gave birth to it could survive. In the talks Victoria gave in Europe and the US, she liked to remind audiences of the so-called executed Renaissance, the mass murder of Ukrainian writers and intelligentsia on Stalin's orders in the 30s. She died to avoid a repeat of that horror. Walking through Harvard Square or Coolidge Corner on a sunny day, I marvel at the contrast. The blue sky, students arrived, autumn in the air, surrounded by the joyful exuberance of normal life. I can't help thinking of the price others pay to make sure it stays this way, and wondering how that might change. Megan. Megan Marshall.
I'm Megan Marshall, a biographer and a professor at Emerson College. I'm going to read my passage from the book called Remembering Victoria Amelina. We were gathered in Oskol Melnichuk's living room on a Sunday afternoon in February 2020. All of us, except perhaps Oskol and his wife, who had lived in the house for decades, seeking a sense of home in the greater Boston area. Companionship, Oskol believed, could come close to providing home-like sustenance, and he offered us that gift. I'd heard I would meet Oskol's friend, Victoria Amelina, a young writer from Ukraine, and I'd brought her a different sort of gift, a copy of the latest issue of a literary journal in which I'd published a photo essay featuring 8 photographs taken by my grandfather, Joe Marshall, 100 years before on a Red Cross mission to Poland in 1919. The photos documented a typhus epidemic raging in a region still called Eastern Galicia in my grandfather's notes on the expedition. The team was made up of medical officers from France, Italy, England, and the US, as well as 2 photographers, and had been commissioned by the newly established League of Red Cross Nations. League of Red Cross Societies, the first ever international relief organization chartered in tandem with the League of Nations. From this distance in time, across a lethal pandemic, the sequelae of an attempted coup in the US, the war of atrocities waged on Victoria's homeland, I remember little of the February afternoon in Medford, except that when I handed Victoria the journal, and she looked at my grandfather's black and white photos of a war-ravaged countryside and impoverished and fever-stricken families, she said, "This is Ukraine." The Red Cross mission passed through Brody, Dubno, Koval, Ternopil, Chortkiv, Sokolniki, Sukhodoli, Kopachinsi, and concluded at Lviv, where my grandfather's notes from September 1919 include this terse record of then recent history. Taken by Russians, September 1914. Retaken by Austrians, June 1, 1915. Taken by Ukrainians, November 1, 1918. Taken by Poles, students, November 15, 1918. Besieged, for 6 months longer. A full-scale war in Ukraine had seemed distant to both of us. We were looking at history. Victoria may have seen in her mind's eye, superimposed on the photos, the Ukraine that had risen from those ashes, from the history of her country's hard-won independence she knew and had lived. To that country, to her home, Victoria Amelina, the vital young woman I would meet just once, gave her life while recording new tragedy, making history. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carolyn Guile. I thank Oswald for my first introduction to Victoria through an event that we hosted at Colgate University in November for my students with her. I'm going to also read from the book. Victoria in Kraków. Ulica Krupnicza, 20. Kraków. 19th January 2023. Victoria had been recovering from pneumonia, but was eager to socialize a bit. We met at Dynia Restobar. In the center of the main room hang open books, their pages somehow illuminated from within by amber lamps descending from ivy swags. Writers and scholars like to go there to work. Polish students in suits and dresses enjoy end-of-semester celebratory dinners there. We talked over several teas about Polish poetry, her son's French lessons, architectural heritage, and her desire to visit the National Pantheon, where the poet Adam Zagajewski's ashes are now interred. Krupnicza Street at one time had been the nucleus of Krakow's literary life. It was here, adjacent to Dynia at number 22, that the Polish Writers' Union had been located from 1945 to 1995, housing in its damp, cold, and cramped spaces numerous Polish writers, such as Wisława Szymborska. The Germans had occupied that tenement house during the war for their oil officials. A unit of the Red Army had been stationed there at the time the Writers' Union took it over. Into the spring, Krupnicza Street was still in the throes of an extensive renovation. New pavement, trees planted at intervals, a few of the facades freshly scrubbed. But in March, the last time I saw Victoria in person, the street was still more or less an inside-out version of itself. I was not able yet to show her the plaque now set in the pavement at 11A, marking the place where the pediatrician and writer Tadeusz Wojciechowski had lived from 1913 to 1922. He would later be murdered by the Germans during the Lvov professors' massacre of 1941. Each of us who knew Victoria will remember how we came to know her. I will always remember and admire Victoria's warmth, her self-deprecating humor, and her genuine interest in others. She did not need to embellish or to convince. We had talked a lot about cultural heritage and erasure, and she had carried Stefan Tarnushenko's magnificent atlas of Ukrainian wooden architecture from Lviv to present it to me in spring, a gift she somehow managed to find the energy to acquire from her publisher friend in Kharkiv, out of her desire to share Ukraine's human beauty with others. I had hoped to give her a recent book about Krupnicza Street in return, but never had the chance. Panel. A lecture hall in Berkeley, an art historian explains painting by shaping words so concretely that even Merleau-Ponty's Cézanne, presented in this way, becomes painting in action. I ask him later, do you paint? Hands folding glasses and closing, he replies, oh no, not at all. A Sunday in March, I was struck at manga by kimonos, shaping planes, their open arms releasing white and gold birds, mute witnesses so that those silken cranes might open their beaks and fan their wings in imitation of human gestures. My heart cracked open at the sight of this, your lifeblood on a white couch, an unfinished passage of marked objection. They rushed to you. The soldier, a medic, cradled your head, revealing your last words, those bold and terrible brushstrokes you were forced to make. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. It's amazing to see so many people gathered here for Victoria. We knew each other back in Ukraine. I remember some years ago going on a trip to Poland together. Then I left to the UK, then I moved to China. And then when in 2021 I was back in Ukraine, I remember we were meant to meet. We wanted to go sit down, have a dinner together and have a chat. And then, as it often happens, things didn't quite work out. And it's kind of crazy to think that they're not going to work out. What I will do, I will read 2 poems of Victoria's in Ukrainian. And I will have other people do what I'm sure will be an amazing job of reading them in English. And then I will just say a few words about the impact of this war on the writers like Victoria. And I will read 1 short poem of mine, which is dedicated to them. So that's a plan. But I think it's going to be nice to start by letting Victoria's words sound out in her native Ukrainian. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Свідчення, which is a testimony. В цьому дивному місті свідчать лише жінки. Одна говорить мені про зниклу дитину. 2 говорять про закатованих у підвалі. 3 кажуть, що чули про зґвалтування і відводять очі. 4 говорять про крики з комендатури. 5 про застрелених на подвір'ях. 6 говорять, але нічого не розібрати. 7 досі вголос перераховують запас їжі. 8 кажуть, що я брешу і справедливості не існує. 9 говорять поміж собою, ідучи на цвинтар. Я теж іду, бо вже знаю всіх у цьому місті. І всі його мертві – це мої мертві. І всі вцілілі – це мої сестри. 10 говорять про вцілілого чоловіка. Його також забирали. Він може бути за свідка. Я стукаю в його двері, але виходить сусідка. Говорить за нього. Лиш здається, що він вцілілий. Іди, говори з жінками. Do you like the video translation? No?
Yes. Sorry, I'm a bit late, and I'm going to read the English translation of Testimony. Testimony. Only women testify in this strange town. One speaks of a missing child. 2 speak of the tortured in the basement. 3 repeat what rapes and averts the eye. 4 speak of the screams from the military headquarters. 5 speak of the executed in their own yards. 6 speak but are incomprehensible. 7 check food supplies, counting out loud. Eight, call me a liar because there is no justice. 9 talk on their way to the cemetery. I'm also on my way because I know them all. In this town, it's dead are my dead. Its survivors are my sisters. 10 speak of a survivor, a man. He's returned from captivity, and he could testify. I knock on his door, a neighbor opens. It seems like he has survived all right, she says. Go talk to the women. And this poem was translated by Bojana Mort. My first encounter with Victoria was at a meeting that Ascode invited us to discuss questions of homeland. And it was 2 weeks after I got into the US from Nigeria. And in that meeting, we spoke about our relationship with homeland, the idea of faith, even as it was sort of like receding in my own view. Just 2 weeks after I left Nigeria, and I was wondering what my relationship and connection to Nigeria and also the broader idea of home. As a poet, I've come to realize that every word is haunted by its opposite. And for me, the word home, what it evokes for me is the idea of feeling unsettled every time. No matter what context that word is used, my initial response to it would be the fragility of faith, how it forces us to constantly fight to protect it, to nurse it, and to also make sacrifices. Sometimes as poets, we think in the context of nostalgia, our obsession with the past. Perhaps it's not the beauty of what is lost, but the people that we've left there, our loved ones, the memories we share with spaces, places we grew up, our formative years, and all of that. Perhaps it's this sort of insistence to preserve or to constantly hold out. Every word you write on the page is a kind of like reaching out to this particular place you've left, and your loved ones, your people who are still there. And so when I read about Victoria's demise, it was like the moment of that interaction that returned back to me, and the way that we were thinking about it just like 4 years ago, and discussing about it with passion, but also with a kind of regret. Even though Ukraine at that point had not been invaded, there was a sense of relative peace and quietness. But again, the tension of discussing home or talking about home or people you love far away from it, in the US in this context, sort of like haunted the general conversation we had that day. And when I heard the news, that moment returned to me, charged as it was, as we were having that conversation, and uncompleted, punctuated by sadness and regret. And it happened shortly before the pandemic, which again sort of like added an extra layer of weight to the idea of home, to the idea of connection, and also the work that we do. I'm very grateful to Ascode for organizing this and also inviting me and allowing me to read this poem as a way to pay tribute and honor Victoria, and also honor the idea that we share together as both writers and travelers and humans in the world generally. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And now I will read Victoria's second poem. У весняне синє поле вийде жінка в чорній сукні. Імена сестер кричати, наче птах в порожнє небо. Викричить усіх із себе, ту, що відлетіла швидко, ту, яка про смерть благала, ту, що не спинила смерть. ту, яка чекає досі, ту, яка усе ще вірить, ту, що 40 днів мовчить. Викричить їх всіх у землю, наче біль засіє в полі, з болю та імен жіночих виростуть їй нові сестри, знов співатимуть життя. Ну а що вона? Ворона. А вона навік в цім полі, бо лиш крик її тримає всіх цих ластівок в повітрі. Чуєш, як вона гукає всі по черзі імена? And we will hear a translation of this poem as well.
Okay. My name is Lara Stetsevich, and I will be reading a poem about a crow, translated into English by William Blacker. In a barren springtime field stands a woman dressed in black, crying her sisters' names like a bird in the empty sky. She'll cry them all out of herself. The one that flew away too soon, the one that had begged to die, the one that couldn't stop death, the one that has not stopped waiting, the one that has not stopped believing, the one that still grieves in silence. She'll cry them all into the ground as though sowing the field with pain. And from pain in the names of women, her new sisters will grow from the earth and again will sing joyfully of life. But what about her, the crow? She will stay in this field forever because only this cry of hers holds all those swallows in the air. Do you hear how she calls each one by her name? Thank you.
So obviously we are all here today to remember Victoria, but I also would like to say a few words about other writers in Ukraine and how they're affected by this war, because unfortunately what happened to Victoria does not stop with Victoria, and it keeps happening. And among those countless people risking their lives in this war, many, like Victoria, are Ukrainian writers. There are those fighting, like Igor Mitrov, for example, a poet from Crimea, or Yelizaveta Zharikova, a poet but also a composer and musician, originally from Luhansk region, recently wounded in action. Artem Chekh, the author of Absolute Zero, and you might have read his opinion piece in August in the New York Times on his experience fighting near Bakhmut. There are also those missing in action, like my friend Mykola Leonovich, not just a poet, but an incredibly talented book designer. Some of you might know his work from Curie's edition of Volodymyr Vakulenko's Mondergreen. So that cover was designed by Mykola. We knew him as Mykolan as well, so he's been missing in action since the spring of this year. There are also those we lost irrevocably, like we did Victoria. Some of you might know the name of a poet and a children's writer, Volodymyr Vakulenko, whose diary Victoria helped to discover and who was murdered a year ago or so. And in fact, just the day before yesterday, PEN Ukraine published the news that yet another poet has been lost to this war, Oleksiy Vakin, a slam poet from Kharkiv. So these things don't stop unless they are made to stop. And I want to be clear, it's not going to be us who will stop them. It's going to be those men, women, non-binary Ukrainians fighting for their land and their freedom and their loved ones. But I feel that there is something that we can do as well, perhaps our small part. And I think what we can do is keep their memory alive and also demand that those responsible for these crimes, those who robbed Victoria's son of his mom, and Volodymyr Vakulenko's 2 sons of their dad, and many more children of their parents, that they're held accountable. And so I call on you to do what you can to make this happen. And I think being here today is already part of that. Just one very last thing I want to do today is read the poem which is dedicated to Victoria and those other friends who are lost to this war. I sit here like a dog, and I don't understand death. I don't get it. I don't follow. I can't get my head around it with my dog's brain. So here's a person, and now only her clothes remain, her boots, the left sole slightly more worn on the inside, the torn edge of the pocket sewn up by a hand that suddenly no longer knows how to sew, or write, or hold a knife or fork, or stroke her son's head, or click her fingers impatiently. Can we learn all this again, somewhere, after the end? Receipts in a handbag, from the dry cleaners, the cafe, some crumbs from a pastry bought on the way home from work. What is this for? These traces of our presence, if our absence, will always snap shut behind us, like the doors of the metro train, trapping the edge of our favorite jacket. Sometimes we think in grand terms. We look down, stunned, unblinking, into the black holes now gaping in the body of our time, of our country, but I, from the humble height of my dog's muzzle, my dog's heart, can only think one thing: don't go. Brush some more crumbs from the table. Water the cactus. Swear standing in a traffic jam. Sneeze into your sleeve. Screw up your face at the taste of an unripe apricot. Keep loving the winter more than the summer. There's no need for anything else. No films, no paintings, no festivals, no brilliant novels. To hell with paintings and to hell with novels. Please, somewhere, just be. Thank you.
Extraordinary poem that was. Thank you. My name is Christopher Merrill. I had the good luck to hire Victoria to teach an online creative writing course with Askold. I thank Askold and all the people at Aerosmith Press and here at the bookstore for their efforts to remember Victoria. We live in an occupied country misunderstood, the American poet William Stafford wrote in the early years of the Cold War. Justice will take us millions of intricate moves. 3 decades after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the declaration of the end of history, the Russian invasion and occupation of Ukraine reminds us not only that the Cold War never ended, but that the return of history means justice for victims of Russian aggression will require millions of intricate moves from all of us. No one understood this better than the novelist and poet Victoria Amelina, whose life was cut tragically short this summer, when Russian forces launched an Iskander cruise missile at a restaurant in Kramatorsk, Ukraine, killing 13 people and wounding 61. Among the intricate moves that Victoria made during the war was to abandon writing fiction in order to research war crimes, and I might add, to write poems. A decision that may have inspired her to write some of the most searing war poems of our time, as in this poem translated from the Ukrainian by Anatoly Kuratevsky. Sirens. Air raid sirens across the country. It feels like everyone is brought out for execution. But only one person gets targeted, usually the one at the edge. This time, not you. All clear. In November 2022, I had the honor of hosting a dozen poets and writers from Algeria, Kazakhstan, Mauritius, Myanmar, Poland, Ukraine, and the United States for a symposium titled Homelands at the Borderland Foundation's International Center for Dialogue in Sani, Poland. Victoria's calm presence and absolute ferocity of spirit, along with the essay she wrote on the subject, Expanding the Boundaries of Home, a Story for Us All, have become for me emblems of the sorts of intricate moves necessary for justice to prevail. What impressed me was her ability to gaze steadily into the abyss and not fall into despair, perhaps because she possessed a marvelous sense of humor. Her acute grasp of the stakes involved in Ukraine expelling Russian forces from its occupied lands reminded the writers in Sani that inviolable borders are central to any experiment in democracy. Her essay begins with a memory of singing the Scorpion song, Wind of Change, at a summer camp in Russia, and then rehearses a history of Russian-Ukrainian relations that deconstructs the simplistic dream at the heart of the music. Did you ever think that we would be so close like brothers? In Ukraine's dream of Europe. She returns to this song in the concluding paragraph, which goes like this. In June 2022, I arrived in Brussels and took a bus from the airport to the city. I was headed to a meeting of the European Parliament to discuss accountability for Russian war crimes. The bus was full of men in suits, all clearly headed to European institutions as well. However, I was perhaps the only one who noticed the irony of the song that opened the bus playlist. I follow the Muska down to Gorky Park. The frontman of the Scorpion sang into the air of one of the European capitals in 2022. The bureaucrats in their expensive suits kept typing on their laptops, not paying attention to the song and the story it conveyed. I knew I didn't fit into this story, but I knew we came to Brussels to write a whole new narrative for everyone, not to change some lousy playlist on an airport shuttle. Victoria's life and writings belong to that new narrative, as does her death, another Russian war crime for which her murderers must be held to account. When she mentioned Wind of Change at our symposium, I remembered hearing it everywhere during the wars of succession in the former Yugoslavia, which I had covered with some of the same zeal that drove her to bear witness to her country's plight. It occurred to me that what I had experienced during the siege of Sarajevo, the longest in modern history, the terror and privation common to every citizen, journalist, diplomat, and humanitarian, was a precursor to the atrocities unearthed in cities, towns, and villages liberated by Ukrainian forces from the Russians, which Victoria assiduously documented. Think of her efforts to counter the misinformation that shapes every conflict, celebrating the courageous women who do not avert their gaze from catastrophes as both a posthumous entry in the long tradition of war literature and the prologue to a different kind of story, truth-telling for a dark age. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexandra Romantsova. I'm Executive Director Center for Civil Liberties. It's human rights defending organization from Ukraine, which working there 15 years. And last year we have a new etap of our work because we have a Nobel Peace Prize 2022. But my meeting with Victoria started before that. In 2014, it happened. Like always, you never plan it, but maybe you heard about such small city which called Slaviansk. all the people who interesting of how it's happened 24 February 2022 need to know that Slavics, that was beginning. That was place where the one guy who calls Birkin started a war at the Donbass after annexation of Crimea. And we have a possibility come there after 4 days when they left, totally destroyed society of Slaviansk and go to Donbass, go to Donetsk. So that was the first 8 people who coming to documented war crimes. And how I just mentioned today, it was just lucky busters. We are not exploding because we don't have any rules. We're going there just trying to catch this moment, catch and keep it till we have a possibility, have a justice. That was 8 people, 4 of them was journalists, 3 Ukrainian, 1 Briton, 2 lawyers, and 2 human rights defenders. Me, like a head of this small mission, and Konstantin Ryutsky, head of 1 more human rights organization from Lugansk. From all of these 8 people, just me staying here for you, and Britain journalist, he is not in the front line. All other lawyers, journalists, human rights defenders at the front line now in Ukraine. But that was a moment when we exactly started documented war crimes. And nobody knows how to do that. Ukraine before never have a war. And we're trying to find the people who can explain us how to do that. Like once time, we can be lucky, but next time we need some instruction. So we're going to Croatia, we're going to Bosnia and Herzegovina, we speak with people from Colombia, we speak with people from Chechnya, and we're trying to understand how to do that. And a lot of human rights defenders from Ukraine started documented war crimes, and some of them here with us, and they will have a word after me. So at the 24th of February 2022, we know what we need to do. We are staying in Ukraine, but our names was in the list for destroying because Russia don't like us before. And that's why we changed the place where we're living. But we still started gather all the information which can bring in one moment Putin and whole around him people who 90 years exactly terrorized society of Ukraine by the different form of aggression, because we believe that in one moment all of them will be in God at the court, and whole the world will see that it can be business as usual with people who do a war crime. 24th of February, a lot of journalists started ask us what rule of war exactly Russia broken. War have rules? Seriously? And only human rights defenders in Ukraine can explain, yes, war have rules. It's not exactly what we're dreaming for. We wanted that whole the war was a crime, but even inside this way of, communication between state, exist rules. And that's why we started speak about the documentary of war crimes with all the people. Sometimes I just make a video in Instagram, internet, send it, just explain the people how you need to hold this information till you care. Because we need gather all of this to the moment when justice have a possibility to become. Victoria was one of such person who discovered what that means when a woman, day by day, going to the ruined village, listen to all the story of people who survived or about people who not survived, and wrote a book about women inside all of this totally injustice process, dreaming about justice. And when she comes, we okay, come to us, go together with us, speak with people, see the a lot of politicians who we need speak for, that they make a decision that this justice can be possible. And so we not only give the interview to Victoria, but we took her together with us to Brussels. And exactly one moment when we have this invitation from Colombia, we ask her, maybe you want to represent voice of people who waiting for justice for Ukraine. And she go in there. And she was a star. Because Victoria really passion, really nice, tender, really feeling person. So she was beloved by all the people who met her. And when she comes back, she always back with a contact, with a great feeling about people, connection. That's why how they met the people was with her in Kramatorsk. And I'm still feel the pain because, you know, it's like adult friendship. Yeah, we need to have a coffee. Yeah, sure, next time. And we planned it exactly when she need to come back from Kramatorsk. We have a plan to have a coffee. So I hope, I exactly not drink a coffee at all. It's just like for socialization. We'll just speak, have a coffee, but that's mean have a deep connection with really warm communication. So my plan exactly, look at the Putin in Gulag Zal of court, when the moment when holding justice will happen, take a coffee and think about Victoria. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Roman Avramenko. I'm the executive director of Truth Hounds. It's a Ukrainian NGO that documents and investigates war crimes and other international crimes. And you probably know that Victoria were one of our field documenters. She approached us, contacted us last summer in 2022, saying that she wanted to be a documenter of war crimes. And it's not that we were hiring at the time, but she was so persistent and enthusiastic that eventually we trained her how to become a war crimes documenter, and she started to go to the field fact-finding missions. She was like in the first rows. Whenever new field missions were assembled, she was like, I'm gonna go, it doesn't matter where and when. She started with documenting of torture and illegal detention on the then Russian-controlled territories from the people who were lucky to survive and escape from the captivity and cross the front line between Ukrainian and Russian forces. And then after bigger territories were occupied, she started to go into Kharkiv region. During one of the missions to Izum, we were together with her in Kapitolivka. We were documenting detention chamber where Russian troops were holding and torturing men and women from Balaklia and surrounding villages. We have identified 180 victims of these crimes. And then we moved to Izum, documenting shelling of this city. And she so wanted to go to Kapitolivka, to the hometown of other Ukrainian poet and writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. So she went there. We interviewed at the time he was missing. We interviewed his mother, then we went to his father's place, interviewed him, and it was the moment when Victoria discovered the diary of Volodymyr Vakulenko that he buried under the cherry tree. When on June 27th missile hit the Ria Pizzeria in Kramatorsk, we immediately started the investigation. We used our gloomy expertise that unfortunately has of a really high demand these days during these dramatic events. we started to interview people immediately the same night where the missile hit the pizzeria. During 4 months, till this day, we interviewed 22 direct witnesses. We went to the field. We've been at the struck place. We know that there were 2 cruise missiles, Iskander K, that were launched from the territory that were controlled by Russian forces, and now I can tell from this stage that Victoria Amelina became a victim of war crime, of indiscriminate shelling of civilian population, and the war crime was perpetrated by the 747th Missile Brigade of the 8th General Troops Army of the Russian Armed Forces under the command of Colonel Vitaly Bobe. So it's the results of our investigation. Volodymyr Vakulenko was also found dead in the forest of Izum. His body was exhumed. We also investigate his death as well. We know for sure that he was also executed by Russian troops. This investigation is about to finish in several weeks, I believe. So Victoria was really passionate and dedicated to literature. She was literally forcing us to allocate resources when some crime or some shelling connected to culture was committed. I'm recalling how she persisted that we should send a field visit and allocate our resources, our investigators, when the culture center was hit in the town of New York in Donetsk region. And as in the conclusion, I'd like to say that not only that among Victoria's legacy would be not only her poems and writings, but also testimonies and other evidence she collected, being a documenter, and they will bring justice closer to us. Thank you.
We're so grateful to Osgold and Arrowsmith and Brookline Booksmith, and we're honored to be here tonight with all of you here at Brookline Booksmith and all of you who are watching this memorial for Victoria Amelina. We're going to introduce ourselves and then explain a bit about our collaboration and tell you something that we'd like for you to know about tonight. I'm Jane Unruh. I'm a writer, and I direct the Scholars at Risk program at Harvard University. This is a fellowships program for at-risk and persecuted scholars, artists, and writers from around the world.
So my name is Jackie Hart. I'm a physician in the area, and I am actually part of a consortium of roughly 24 clinicians and scientists from the area who have come together since the big war broke out on February 22nd, 2023 too. We essentially came together to say, what can we do with our expertise. We spent the first 6 to 8 months really communicating with folks on the ground so that we could get medical supplies and equipment directly where it was needed, and then shifted to focus much more on education and training, which we had the fortune of meeting Jane, and she has worked with us hand in hand to support roughly a dozen clinicians so far who have come to do very targeted training. So the training has 2 overarching objectives. One is we want to help with the acute circumstance, right? We want to provide folks with the skills to deal with what they're seeing on a daily basis right now. But the broader objective is that we want to help improve the delivery of healthcare, the healthcare system, and healthcare education over time. So we collaboratively are dedicated to this for a long time to come. We've been working on sustaining the programming by raising funds through a variety of processes. We made the decision after we heard about Victoria that we wanted to designate one fellow each year in her memory. I will say that I am deeply, deeply moved. I will say that we had hoped that the recipient would be here tonight with us. Her name is Lesia Strilka. Lesia she was supposed to be here now. She will be here roughly like mid-October and will stay through January. She's a plastic and reconstructive surgeon who will be studying burns at Shriners Children's Hospital, Mass General, and the Brigham. We had 70 applicants for this position, and part of the spreading of the word was through some partners that we've developed in Ukraine, NGOs, and through the Ministry of Health. One of the partners was actually just here last week. He's traveling in the States. They received a large grant to be able to improve their burn therapies throughout the country. So Lesia is really going to be in a position where she can then implement and disseminate those ideas and concepts. I'm really moved from tonight and learning more and more about Victoria. So my guess, looking at Jane for confirmation, this process of who we select to be recognized in Victoria's memory and name, I'm sure will evolve over time. But I will say that the process, Lesia, I think, does represent a lot of the characteristics that I've heard about Victoria tonight. The grace, the strive for justice, her disposition sounds in many ways very similar, and the bravery. So thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
My name is Oleg Kutsuba. I direct the publications program of the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard, and it is really hard to be here today. Getting the last word means that we need to acknowledge all the people who have come together here, everyone who has spoken, and I would like to start by thanking all the partners, and especially Brookline Booksmith, Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, everyone, every single one of you who have come together because of Victoria, and to remember her and to pay homage to her and to her work. Thank you so very much for doing this. This is not something that is expected. My last conversation with Victoria was on Twitter. She reached out in a joking way and said, "Listen, it seems you're publishing everyone these days. Why are you not publishing my work? Don't you like it? If you don't, that's okay, just tell me." And of course I was laughing, and so of course that was a joke. And I proceeded to tell her that, of course I would love to publish her, and let's make a plan. She told me that she was approached by an agent after a BBC interview, and she asked me whether she should sign with that literary agent or not. And I said, yes, of course you should. This is wonderful, and we'll never finalize those plans. And I hope that the book gets published. I think from what you heard in the very beginning, of how Victoria spoke about her motivations in writing that book, Dom's Dream Kingdom, how much thought she put into it. And I wanted to point out today, as we conclude this evening, that Victoria was always searching for a voice a voice to speak about things that are unspeakable. In that book, a big part of the narration comes from the dog. And so that perspective allows you to assume a certain position of lack of knowledge, where you estrange a lot of the things that you see, where you ask questions, why are things the way that they are? And we need that, because we become so accustomed to how the things are, but so very often they should not be this way. Some of you may have witnessed today how the fate of Ukrainians and the suffering of Ukrainian people has been made into a chip for political capital making. That should not be the case for anyone, not because it's Ukraine, but for any country, for any people who are suffering today. We are so much bigger than that, as a country, as human beings, as neighbors. Volodymyr Zelensky often says in his interviews that this is not Ukraine's war, it's our war. And Russia, and what Russia has come to represent today, with Putin and with the political system that he has established, with the elites that have helped him establish that system, it's not just Ukraine's enemy, it's our enemy, because that kind of system destroys everything in its way. And so all of us need to work together so as to make possible that, to prevent Russia from coming anywhere, to any place, not just Ukraine, but anywhere. I think that I'm very grateful to Victoria for many, many things, but I'm so grateful that she brought all of us here together, including Sasha, who is here today. Coming together is a sign of solidarity, of feeling for each other, with each other, including each other's pain and difficulties. This is what makes us human. Ukrainians today are being killed, and Irina spoke beautifully and eloquently about the fact that Ukrainian writers continue being killed today. Ukrainian writers are also dismissed in Western discourse, where people see Ukraine as this immature child of sorts that is emotional and is suffering right now, but the West knows better, right? They're not ready for this, they're not ready for that. They dismiss the concerns that so many Ukrainian writers have, so many Ukrainian people have, as unwise and untimely. And that shows that kind of attitude as, very superficial and very hurtful. I hope that after this evening, our solidarity will help change that attitude. I'm very grateful to the Brookline Booksmith for putting together a table of books on Ukraine and from Ukraine in translation that I invite you to explore, peruse. They tell a story that is, I think, very persuasive of a people who is not ideal, is not perfect, but a people that believes in values of humanism, of values of meritocracy, values of equality. And I think that if we, all of us together, can do something for Victoria today, coming out of this evening, is to carry that knowledge and to invite your neighbors, your friends, your family members to participate in learning more about Ukraine, and with the hope that at the end of that process, Ukrainians will not be dismissed, their suffering will not be dismissed, and no more Ukrainian writers, Ukrainian people will have to die. Thank you so much for coming again.
That brings us to the end of our reading. I want to thank you again all for being here. And a reminder, yes, the books that Ola were mentioning are on a table on the other side of that pillar, so feel free to peruse. If you have not yet gotten a copy of the book that was brought here for tonight, those which remain are over at that table. And again, if you would like to make a donation to helping Ukrainian books and booksellers today, you can do that at any of our registers. And once again, thank you so much for being here, and have a good night.